Carol, point of order, do we need both of these?
Yes.
All right, everyone, thank you all for coming. I know this is everyone's favorite time of the year when we get to do budgeting. We're going to go ahead and just get the meeting started, and Carol's going to get us kick us off here, I think.
Good morning, Commissioners. Carol Muller, Commission Office. I just want to remind everybody that we are recording today. We are not broadcasting live or at this point putting anything on Channel 16, but Tony is here, and we will be available on our website for people to go through and watch. So today is your first of hopefully not too many meetings to talk about the 2020 budget. Today what you're going to do is we're going to go over a variety of backgrounds for you. We're going to do some overview of the financials, where we're at, where we've been. We're also going to talk an overview of human services, review the total for, human services. We're also going to review the total of the building fund, the requests that have been made along with outside agencies, and also vehicle requests that are out there. So we've got plenty of time. You will be hearing 2 budget hearings this afternoon from the Sheriff's Office and the State's Attorney's Office, both of who are requesting positions. One of the things that I will be asking you, or Commissioner Bender will be asking at the end of this is, are there other agencies you want to have come in beyond what we've got scheduled for Thursday morning, which is the other agencies, departments that have asked for staffing. So with that, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to kick things off with the Auditor's Office, who have done an amazing job in pulling together a lot of information for us to kind of set the stage for what our opportunities and challenges are this year.
Good afternoon, Vicki Hewitt from the Auditor's Office. So we're going to start out here. All right, so these numbers will probably look familiar to you because they are the April numbers that we just went over recently, but we're about a week away from finalizing our May numbers. So just so you know that. So starting out with the general fund cash, sitting at $19.5 million. Our highest in the last 7 years, as you can see by the graph, and up about 1.6 million over last year at this time. So April is, of course, typically one of our higher cash months, so no surprise there. So if we move on to the highway fund.
Vicki, can I ask, which machine am I finding this chart on? iPad. Okay. Thank you.
Item number 2, the Auditor's Report for the budget meeting.
Thank you. Sorry.
And we got a lot of information up there, so.
So the highway fund cash, sitting at 11.2 million and up about 2.4 million over last year at this time. So, and then we move on to revenue. The total revenue at 23.2 million, fairly even over last year, down just a little bit. So then we move on to taxes, which make up the large portion of that. They are down a little bit percentage-wise of budget, pretty even with dollar-wise. But again, we talked about that being likely just timing of mail and payments being applied. So, and then the other portion are other revenues, which are up a couple percentage points. But just not enough to cover those taxes, so that's where we're at there. And then on to expenditures. Total expenditures sitting at 19.2 million, 33% of budget, so again, fairly even with last year. And of course, the biggest chunk of that is our personnel expense, sitting at 13.3 million. Move on just one. There you go. 13.3 million, or 33, almost 34% of budget right now. And then our other expense category, and that is sitting at 5.8 million, 31%, so fairly even again over last year. So. Any questions over any of that before we move on?
Yeah, I think we can go on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bob, are you ready to do the next?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Bob Litz from the County Auditor's Office. And the two things that I wanted to touch on for this budget session is the cash applied numbers that we've had. You can see up on the board there, things were back in 2009, 10, and 11, things were, they had a lot of cash applied. There were high numbers that were cash applied. And then 11, when I think there was three of you commissioners were present when things sort of dried up, and those three things that did dry up was the Board of Prisoners revenue, the interest on the cash that we had, and the bank franchise tax. Those were the boogeymen that put us in the hole. And since that time, 2012, 13, 14, 15, we have built up our cash, especially in the years 2012 and 13. We had some pretty good years of revenue collections and some pretty conservative revenue estimates. And as a result, we had the cash. And since then, we've managed to tighten up a lot more on how much cash that we would put into the budget each year. So as you can see, that top graph of the budgeted or the cash balance has shrunk up. And in 2017, it actually went under for a little bit. The cash applied number that I don't know, there's no real good reason except it's a comfortable number that we have tried to look at maintaining has been about $4.5 million for cash applied. It seems to be a good number. This year here, we're right at $4.7 million. Are there any questions on the cash applied? Very good. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the county opt-outs. And as you can see there, we've got a total of $1,410,000 in building fund opt-outs. One of them was in 2000. There's no limit on that, and that was for the new jail back then. And then there's one in 2005 through 2025, and that was for the Health and Human Services building. That was a smaller amount for $260,000. We have the next category we'd have is the 4 opt-outs that we've done since 2001. 2001 was for $500,000. 2006 through 2026 is for $1,625,000. That's public safety operating expenses. The next one that we did right when I got here was in 2012 for $4 million, and that is from 2020 through 2032, and that's public safety operating expenses, and we applied all of that, I think, that year, if I remember right. And then the third one that we applied, or that we got opt-out, was for $3.5 million, and that went from 2015 until last year. And that opt-out is good through 2040. The reason I'm talking about these opt-outs that they're going through like 2025 and 2026 is those ones will be up, and we'll have to consider replacing them at that time. And at that time, we'll probably do good to talk about the time value of money. $1 million just isn't what it used to be anymore. And those numbers there will enter into several other budget topics that we're going to cover here in the future. So are there any questions about our opt-out history? I did a quick run on that, and if we add in the building fund opt-outs and the total general fund opt-outs, it comes to over that period of time from 2000 to 2020, $551,000 per year. And if we just look at the opt-outs in the general fund, it's even less than that. It's $481,000 per year, averaging out. So I would make the case that this county's been pretty stingy about spending tax dollars. That's not a lot of money to increase every year. So any questions on the opt-outs? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Kim.
Good afternoon. Kim Adamson from the Auditor's Office. I'm next going to cover a series of slides that show our revenue history for the past 7-8 years, our 2019 budget, and then our 2020 projection as it relates to those time periods. So this first graph before you is the total revenue for the general fund from 2012 through our 2020 preliminary budget. And the point to take from this is mostly that if you track the blue bar, which represents the taxes in those years, the taxes levied, that those taxes as a percentage of our total revenue have steadily increased. With our current proposed budget, taxes account for 74.2% of the total revenue in the projection right now. Okay. So next, I've got a couple slides that deal specifically with taxes. The next one then just shows the history of our tax levy over that same time period from 2012 through the 2020 preliminary budget. And again, you can see the blue bar is the base tax levy. That's the portion of the tax levy that is governed by statute. We're limited to a growth factor and CPI factor. Any additional taxes raised has to be done through an opt-out. So if you look at the red bars on this graph, that shows you the opt-out amounts over that same time period. And then lastly, we've got some back taxes outstanding and collected each year.
Kim, just a question. If, let's say in the 2020 budget, if you took the red column and put it on top of the blue one, does that then come up to the line? Is that,
That's the 45 million
Okay.
total, yes.
thanks.
Okay, then the next slide is just some numerical data, but it helps illustrate a couple points that were included on the graph. The first item being the green line, the opt-out as a percentage of total taxes levied. Again, you can see our taxes have increased as a percentage of total revenue, and our opt-out dollars have increased as a percentage of total taxes. So if you look at 2012, we were opting out for 7.3% of our tax revenue, basically. And by the 2019 budget, that's increased to 22.3% of our taxes. So it just demonstrates that we've been, because of the limitations on CPI and growth, we've been in a position to be forced to opt out for a larger percentage of our tax revenue to make ends meet. The bottom half of this table then gives you some historical information on CPI and growth. So CPI has been anywhere from 0% in 2017 to a high of 3% in 2013. The CPI, which is set by the state, is 2.4% for 2020, so it's a relatively good year for CPI. Our growth factor was at a low of 1.3% back in 2013. The highest growth we've seen in the last 8 years is was in 2018 at 3.02%. This year's estimated growth from our equalization office is 2.85%. And then you also can see the dollars that those factors generate. So our 2020 projection, we are actually in a pretty good place. We've seen one of the highest combined increases at 5.25% or 1.75 million. And that is built into the current projection.
Questions for Kim on that?
Madam Chair, I would just comment, I believe that in 2012, our budget was smaller than in 2009. And we had a tough year and we made it happen. But our expenditures in 2012 were smaller than 2009.
Kim, quick question.
Sure.
When you do the CPI percentage to get the 804,000, what are you multiplying the 2.4% by? I was trying to figure that out.
Well, that is based on, there's an actual worksheet you have to follow that is provided by the Department of Revenue. You start with your levied tax from the previous year.
Okay.
And from that, then you have to deduct your opt-outs because we do not get growth or CPI on the opt-out.
Okay.
And then you apply that growth factor as a percentage to those taxes.
So it's close to a number on this chart, but not quite exact.
Right, right.
Okay.
You can't really get to it from what's displayed here.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. So moving on, then we've got slides on every other major category of income included in our revenue for the general fund. So the next chart is on our chart is our charges for goods and services. And you can see from this chart, the 2020 projection is at an all-time high of almost $9.4 million. The components of this category of income has changed over time. The one area that I definitely want to point out is the very first line in the table, the jail fees. That's the largest, the red bar on all of the, showing up in all of these years. Those are the fees we charge for housing out-of-county inmates in our jail facility. And you can see that those have ranged from a high of 3.2 million back in 2012 and 13. And then as our jail facility became increasingly full with our own county inmates, that revenue has been cut back over the years. In 2020, we do have an increase in that revenue stream because of opening the 5th level in the existing jail so that we can again start housing more of the Lincoln County inmates. So there's extra inmate bed rent built into the projection for that. Then the next slide is a category of income we refer to as intergovernmental revenue. The two key components of that revenue are the Air Guard contract. That's up pretty significantly from last year at $1.1 million, and that's because of the additional pay period during the calendar year. So that it's really kind of a budget neutral increase because we're going to see offsetting expenses that coincide with this contract. The second item is the bank franchise tax, and we did increase the projection on that by about $300,000 this year because over the last, just the two most recent years, we've seen some increased distributions of bank franchise tax at the county level. But if you look back even to 2016, that was one of our lower years. The bank franchise was at about half what we have projected for this year. Next category is just miscellaneous revenue. The biggest change from 2019 to 2020's budget is the interest revenue. And again, that's just because we are enjoying some better interest rates on our money that we have on deposit. Our projection is about equal with where we ended 2018 in total. Then we've got a slide on fines and forfeitures from the court system, and that's pretty stable source of income. It runs right around that $375,000 to $390,000.
Question on that slide. So on interest income, you said that
Oh.
you were projecting about where we were for 2018?
No, in total, the total miscellaneous revenue
I'm sorry.
category
Okay, I
is about
misunderstood.
equal.
Okay.
Interest is up quite a bit from where we were.
I find it interesting that clear back from 2012 to 2020, that we've hardly changed at all at fines and forfeitures, but yet we see more people, and it hasn't changed.
Right.
What was that?
It just doesn't, I mean, that's, if you.
$8,000 difference.
Right.
In 8 years.
Right.
Makes no sense.
The next graph we have then is licenses and permits. Similar to fines and forfeitures, not not a huge amount of money, about $300,000 a year. The biggest component of that are our building permits. And we are forecasting in the 2020 budget a decline in that revenue source, just simply because year-to-date, we're seeing our permit revenue falling behind where we were last year at this time. There was a story on the news last night about the city's permit revenue being down 20% so far this year as well. Perhaps if the weather turns around for us, things will pick up a little bit, but we are seeing that lag behind last year's levels a little bit at this time.
If I may. What did we do in 2018 that generated so much beer and liquor license revenue
Bold
that
one.
we couldn't
We,
do
s-
again?
we just sold a license,
One
one license. Now, we'll see in 2019, we sold the second of our 2 available licenses. So now we've depleted that revenue stream, if you will, so until another license becomes available,
And that'll be based on the,
Census.
based on the population census, yeah. Okay, so that covers all of the revenue categories we've got included in this 2020 projection at this point. The next graph are the general fund expenditures. Again, you'll see the line at the top of the graph. Those are total expenditures in the general fund, $62 million. Each of the bars represents a different functional category within the county. Public safety being the largest at the 2020 projected amount at nearly $29 million, or about 46% of our total operating expenses. And much of these expenditures are driven by salaries and benefits. They comprise about 75% of our operating costs.
And Kim, this doesn't include any matrix adjustment, right?
That's correct. Okay, so if we jump to the next slide, I've got a summary here of all the major changes, things that have changed from 2019 to 2020 to get us where we're at in this current 2020 projection. So revenues in total from 2019 to 20 have increased 4.2 million. Salaries and benefits have increased 3 million. All the other non-salary types of costs have increased 800,000. And then you can see the major variances within those categories. So within revenue, 1.3 million of that 4 million is the Board of Prisoners revenue that's built into the forecast for Lincoln County inmates. You've got the property tax growth and CPI, the Air Guard contract, the bank franchise tax, all items that we just talked about in these other revenue graphs. If you jump down to the expenditures, the increase in salary and benefits of 3 million, nearly half of that, or 1.4 million, is the cash impact of the additional pay period that will occur in 2020. We'll have 27 pay periods as opposed to 26. 600,000 of the increase is the impact of a 15% increase in the health insurance costs. About 300,000, 296,000 is the cost of a step increase, and so on. There were some other positions created. There's some Air Guard positions that were funded under the contract. All of that accounts for that $3 million increase. In the non-salary expenditures, 2020 is a budget year, so we'll have a general election, primary and general election. The costs associated with that are $366,000, or that's the increase from a normal year. The court's budget is up $261,000, just based on where we ended 2018 and where we're tracking so far in 2019. Metro requested a 25% increase in their funding. That equated to nearly $90,000. The mental illness budget is up $135,000, also based on where 2018 landed and where we are year-to-date 2019. And then across the rest of the county, those expenses are actually showing a net decrease. So that's what gets us to our 825,000 total increase. So you'll note here, there's nothing built into these variances yet for the impact of any new positions that would be approved or a matrix adjustment. And we've got some other slides to address that coming up here. This is just what we've got built into the projection right now.
So, Kim, it's just, I mean, to kind of restate the obvious, but all of our property tax growth and our CPI growth is eaten up just in the 27th pay period and the health insurance increase. We just get 2 lines down in expenditures and we
Gone.
run all, yep. That's the good news for today, everyone, so.
Okay, next slide. The next slide is the means of finance, and this is the official budget statement that we submit to the Department of Revenue. And it just highlights the different sources of revenue that we've already covered. There is a required 5% reserve against our revenues to get to our net means of finance. And the result of this calculation is that our current projection puts us at a cash applied number of just over 4.5 million. And that's about where we've tried to balance our budget over the last 3 to 4 years, that $4.5 million cash applied number. Okay. And then lastly, we've got a slide that does provides some illustrations as to what the impact to our budget will be based on your decisions as far as matrix adjustment, hiring, filling additional positions, granting requests to outside agencies. So in the requested budget columns, that illustrates what happens if every department gets everything they've requested. So we would grant every new hire request, we would do a 3% matrix adjustment, and outside agencies would all get whatever they've asked for. The end result of that is that we'd have a budget shortfall of $3.4 million. In illustration 1, we've made some adjustments. We're still assuming a 3% matrix adjustment. The new hires have been reduced, so that assumes we would fill the positions at the jail and 3 to 4 other positions across the county. There'd be some resulting savings in equipment and training and vehicles. This illustration assumes we reduce a few of the outside agency requests. We would make some cuts to equipment requests, and we'd try to find some other cost savings in department budgets. In addition to that, it assumes we would hope to find another $200,000 of revenue to build into the projection. So those assumptions get us to a budget shortfall of $2 million. And in the last illustration then is kind of the bare bones illustration. That assumes still a 3% matrix adjustment. It assumes we fill only the positions requested for public safety at the jail. There'd be savings on equipment. We'd have to find some cost reductions in departments. We would hopefully be able to identify some revenue increases. That would get us to a shortfall of $1.5 million. And again, this is just to kind of illustrate the impact of various budget decisions as we proceed through these hearings.
Any questions for Kim on that?
The revenue for the projected revenue for Lincoln County is in those numbers already.
It is.
Yeah, that was that revenue for the Board of Prisoners, so. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, but that supposes that they'll just use 45 beds that we've guaranteed them, right?
Yes.
If in fact they want to keep all 110 of their prisoners here, that number would be different.
It would?
Because I believe that's what I heard that they had parked around the world.
And the warden is here, and I don't think we have room for.
We don't, but
Yeah.
they don't either.
Yeah, go ahead, Warden Romer. Thank you.
I don't know exactly how many inmates Lincoln County has currently. 110 seems high to me, though. Last I knew, they were in that 70-ish range. But I don't monitor that on a close basis, so I don't know where exactly they're at today.
Even 60 would make a difference on our budget, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Once we start getting above our 45 to 50, I get a little bit leery on how much available bed space we're gonna have with the staffing allocations that we currently have. So, once we start increasing past some of those numbers, we get a little bit questionable as to whether or not we're gonna need to increase staff, which then obviously decreases the amount of revenue generated from that.
I'll give up my bunk.
Thank you very much. It is complicated, so. Any other questions for Kim? I think, one of the most helpful things that we've had is this cash applied illustration, so Commissioner Benega.
Tell me again why we don't do accruals for payroll at the end of the year rather than use the amounts that are going to be paid on that 27th payroll, because frankly, we don't get consistent information about the budget when you have 25 payrolls in one year and 27 in the next.
That is a true statement. We have not had in the past the ability to do a monthly accrual. With our new software, we could begin doing a budget accrual for payroll. In the year we would adopt that change, though, there is gonna be some financial impact to adopting that as well.
Well, that's where I'm going with this, because if we got 27 this year, we've added $2 million to the operating cost, if you will, close to it, with payroll changes and benefits. If we go to an accrual basis next year, there will be, frankly, an accurate number of payroll periods and days of service.
Well, actually, next year, I think the last payday lands on December 31st, but there would still be an additional 5 days to accrue over and above that.
But that's my argument on why we would do accruals rather than just payroll periods.
That is something we could consider doing. This anomaly occurs about every 8 or 9 years. If we adopt that, then in the future, we would not ever see a spike like this, because by 2021, we're gonna go back to 21 pay periods.
My suggestion would be that at some point we do that, because frankly, it gives us more accurate picture for every year rather than what we're doing and just recording the number of payroll periods.
Right.
And I think that's a benefit to all of us, because those payroll periods are worth
And they're only gonna get larger.
5% of, yeah, exactly.
8 years from now, it's gonna be a lot more than $1.4 million.
I certainly agree that it'd be easier to bite this off 1/7 or 1/8 at a time than, because it really puts us behind the 8 ball this year. Any other questions for Kim about the cash applied illustrations? Okay, thank you. So I think, Auditor Litz, were you gonna come up and give you're on the agenda as giving the recommended cash applied, so we kind of talked around. Okay. I'm fine, you guys, you're kind of good where we are. I understand at least what is being recommended at this time. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're ahead of schedule, which is always good. Hi, Carrie.
Aye.
a mouse, thank you. Well, I don't know, I need to be in control, but there we go. Money, now I could use your help. Where's my full screen going? You know?
There we go. So I'm there.
Oh, they're good.
You're good,
Thanks.
yep.
All right. All right, thanks for your patience. I'm going to start with reviewing some of the information that we look at each year to help you make a decision about what you want to adjust the matrix by. So this chart should look familiar from last year. The first section is a breakdown of CPI data. Since we're in 2019, the grayed out area simply gives you an average of where we're at through April. So you can see that CPI is down a little bit lower than what it was in 2018. I'm giving you the national data, the Midwest data, and then I'm also showing you the impact from the South Dakota State minimum wage adjustment that actually took place going into 2019. And then, of course, what we've been given for budget in 2019, and under column 2020, all we know at this point is that our allowed growth is at 2.4%. The section on employment cost index is federal information on the growth of salaries and wages. They break this down in a lot of different areas. I'm only giving you the information for salaries and wages for civilian, private, and state and local government. Again, I've got some grayed out areas because we don't have a full year's worth of data, and this is published quarterly. So what you're seeing there is the ending for March of 2019 over March of 2018. We have a lot of discussion about matrix adjustments versus step increases and what that really means. All this information is really intended to give you and drill down at what a matrix adjustment should be. But a really good apples to apples comparison is what average salary structure increases have been. We rely on published data sources for this information, either from Siegel Waters or World at Work. So that next section breaks out what the data says were average structure increases for 2019. And the final section is really real life data on what our comparable entities are doing, what they've done for salary adjustments each year. Above the gray line, you see what we've done for a matrix adjustment each year, and then the average for all of our comparable organizations. And those are the same comparable organizations we've been talking about as we've gone through each salary study. So what I'm saying is we made a 2% matrix adjustment for 2019. If you look at the average of all our comps, they did a 2.19% increase on average. So we're in the range, but trailing slightly. And because I thought you might be interested in some direct comparisons, I also gave you the city of Sioux Falls, Lincoln County because they're close to us, Pennington County because they're very comparable, Metro Communications in the state as well. Is there any questions on that type of data? Right.
So Carrie, can I
Yeah.
just, so when you give 2020 information, you're saying that the city of Sioux Falls Union has already agreed to a 3%
That's
increase?
correct. Yep, thank you for pointing that out. So if there's a contract or a union contract for any of those entities, or if they've already said what they're going to do, it's reflected in the 2020 column. The other area of employees that we have to look at for increases, of course, are elected official salaries. Same type of information being presented to you. It looks a little different because we pay our elected officials entirely based, well, you determine increases while looking at market data. So this is the same chart you've seen in past years as well. The first column gives you their current salary. The yellow columns gives you market information for those positions. Now remember, our comparable organizations pay in a variety of ways. Some pay based on a range and others pay based on a flat rate, which can really skew that base and max. So the salary column is the average of all the elected officials currently in those roles, and the midpoint would be the midpoint for the range. The last peachish color columns is a comparison so you can get a sense of equity with their their assistant department head level position. The current column says where they're at right now, and the last column gives you an idea of where they would be at by the end of the year. And closely tied to that, the next chart gives you a breakdown of equity with other department heads so you can see how our elected officials fall out. Any questions on either of those? Right. Kim stole my thunder. We've been talking about this for a while. Unfortunately, it's not good thunder. You know that we're recommending budgeting a 15% increase in health insurance premiums. This chart is intended to help explain why 15% when we've had fairly good experience recently. I don't know that it'll come as a surprise because the last 2 years as I've stood in front of you to talk about the premium adjustments, I've warned you that we're having a couple of bad claim years. And we didn't want to overreact to those claim years, but unfortunately they did continue for 2 years in a row. And the beginning of 2019 isn't going terribly well either. The nice thing is when you look at that last column of our health premium increase history, we've enjoyed 5 years of fairly nominal increases, and 3 of those being at 0. And that makes sense when you compare when we're setting those premium increases in comparison to when we're looking at the health plan. Where things really changed is in 2017. So if you look at that first column, this year I'm giving you the health claims after we've been reimbursed by stop loss. So if you look at 2014, 2015, and 2016, I haven't highlighted those because we really didn't have claims that resulted in our having to get a stop loss premium back, or rather stop loss payment back. 2017 and 2018, we had $1.2 million in stop loss reimbursement in 2017, $900,000 in 2018, and that really illustrates what's going on with our health plan. It's just a matter that we've had some significantly high claims within the past couple of years. Why I'm highlighting that is because if you actually go through the chart and say, what are we expecting for 2019 claims? What are we expecting for 2020 claims? And all the administrative fees, that middle column says what we actually require for a premium increase is around 23%. It's pretty significant. I'm standing in front of you again saying I want us to be cautious in how quickly we react to that because it only has been 2 years of premium increases or those spikes in claims. But at the same time, I want you to be aware of that number. If we were to look at this information and say that we anticipated a slight decrease in our health claims for 2020, in other words, if we could control that trend line just a little bit, and if our new pharmaceutical plan actually helps control costs as we're hoping that they could, that number could very easily come back into a 12 to a 15% range. It's early in the year, which is why I always caution when we're looking at these numbers, they can be a little bit misleading, but I want you to be aware that this is technically what would be required if we were just to follow trend and apply where our premium revenue is right now. Any questions on that?
Commissioner Heiberger?
A question just going way back.
Yep.
Use
Quite
the
a few
mic.
years ago. Quite a few years ago, we were taking insurance holidays, or we would get cash back, and would have it been, it was great, but more prudent to just continue to save that money and have little increases at that time by paying those? I'm just thinking about going forward.
Yeah, and
so.
you actually talked a little bit about that at that point in time. The problem is you're trying to budget, and at that point in time, we knew that we were taking in no small amount more than we needed. I mean, $500,000. I mean, each premium holiday around $250,000. So we were way overfunding our plan so that we could pay out the claims. So I get cautious, a little concerned about saying, oh, we know we're taking in way too much. We're going to go ahead and store it away for a situation. Really, my goal is to try and increase premiums at our budget need. And the next slide gives you exactly that kind of information, so you can look at really the severity of the change in just this last couple of years. I'm giving you the balance of the health reserve. That reserve balance, that's the fund that we keep our money in so that when the claims come in, we can pay them out. We pay our administrative fees. That next column shows you the total cost of operating our health and dental plan. And then the third column gives you a ratio of really how much we've had in the reserve fund compared to our costs. You might recall that we've had actuarial reserve analyses in the past. They've given us a pretty broad range and ratio of where we need to fund. At that time we had it done, it was in the 70 to 80% area, but we were warned at that point that that was really healthy, probably more than we need. What we really need is enough to go ahead and pay out claims and administrative fees if we were to stop the health plan for that period of time. So I think we're sitting fine, but I'm concerned about looking at the fact that we ended last year at a ratio of 0.48 instead.
Questions for Carrie? a lot of time mulling this over, and it's not, it's certainly, we appreciate you keeping such a close eye on this. And I think if I could distill what you're telling us is that you're comfortable with this recommendation, but if the trend line doesn't flatten, we're going to be looking at significant increases again next year.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is this is budget. There have been cases where we've done less than what was budgeted, and there have been cases where we've done more. So we'll really do the thorough analysis when we have more information for what we would need for 2020 and come back with that recommendation in October, November.
It's the issue with self-insured plans. I mean, you have good years, and then you have years that are challenging, and there tends to be peaks and valleys. We had a number of really, really good years, and I think we still offer a really very affordable, great plan for our employees, and you can see that by the enrollment numbers. A very high percentage of our employees take advantage of this health insurance, but we just gotta stay on top of it and be prudent.
It's a really good point. Again, when you average those health premium increases over the past 5 years, even with a 15%, we're doing really well. And as Gina's pointing out, health enrollment has only continued to incline, meaning we have more people on our plan as employees as well as members, which shows us that we're competitive. Right, the last item I have for you is just a summary of what the 2020 position and staffing requests are for. The top half represents new positions for the full year. The bottom half represents any type of staffing request other than that. So this is fairly small print, and I apologize for that. Some of these positions you've talked about before, I'll just run through real quickly. Equalization is asking for an appraiser in training. Human Services is asking for an alliance caseworker. That would help also support the PDO office. JDC is asking for another JCO2 for training, I believe. The PDO is asking for a legal office assistant. SAO is asking for 2 deputy state's attorneys, 2 digital discovery techs, and a paralegal, and a legal office assistant. The jail is asking for a CO in training for the courthouse, and an additional 12 for the jail. So I split those out only because of the area that they're intended to work in. That gives you a request for a total of 26 full-time, full-year positions at a cost of a little over $1.5 million, and that is with the salary and benefits in the 27th pay period. The requests on the bottom are, again, anything other than a full-year request. Facilities is asking for a senior building maintenance worker position. You might remember that there's a building maintenance worker position that has been in their budget for the last couple years, unfunded, but we've left it there knowing that when the new jail was built, we would have a need for it again. Mark's looked at it and recommending reclassification of that vacancy to a senior level to be more consistent with his other staff and the needs that will be required. And so that shows you the full year cost of that. Human Services, the reason that you're seeing a little less for the total cost of the request is they're asking for an administrative clerk position, but they currently have part-time funds that go to support their office. If this position is funded on a full-time basis, they'll eliminate the part-time costs. The PDO is requesting a part-time legal office assistant. This would not be a benefits eligible position. It would just be money to support them in hiring somebody on a part-time basis. The state's attorney's office is requesting a diversion coordinator. This is a grant-funded position. You're seeing the full cost of that position here because it's already been taken into consideration on the revenue side by the auditor's figures. And the sheriff's office patrol division is asking to reclassify deputy sheriff to sergeant, and that's why you're seeing a total cost of less than $9,000 because it only represents that promotional amount. So everything in total, about $1.7 million in requests.
Questions for Carrie? Just for the, for the commissioners and for those of you here listening, everyone who's requested a new position is currently scheduled, every department that's requested a new position is currently scheduled to come and appear before us either today or Thursday morning. So we should hear in person from everyone who's requested a new position.
Okay, thank you.
Takes us back to Carol.
You have me just for a few minutes. And we're going to flip open another document. We'll see if I'm as good as what Carrie did to put that together. Last is everything else that are requests that come in. The first one that we will do is vehicles. And I would note that those first ones are all out of general funds. The last part for highway would come out of the highway funds. So for that, you have equalization, who has requested a vehicle for a new appraiser position, an additional vehicle for an appraiser. Last year, I believe it was, they guys budgeted a position but not a vehicle for that. And then they have a 2002 Chevy Blazer that they are proposing to go through and do. All of these have put their justification within their narratives that you can go through and review. Facilities would be a replacement of a pickup. JDC is looking at replacing an older vehicle with a transfer of a Yukon from the highway for a cost for $30,000, and along with that would come the cost of $4,000 for a radio. The sheriff has 6 patrol vehicles at $204,000 with vehicle equipment that goes into that. And that pretty much is the usual rotation, I believe, for you guys, is to do those particular vehicles. And then emergency management, they're talking about a replacement vehicle for the assistant emergency manager. And so that brings us to a total of $376,500 from the general fund. On top of that, you have from the highway fund several items. You have a 3/4 ton road crew pickup, a 1/2 ton bridge crew pickup, 2 tandem trucks, a semi-tractor, and a skid steer, all for a total of $791,300. So that's what we have in for vehicle requests. Now, to talk a little bit about outside agencies. You heard Kim during her presentation talk about outside agencies and the dollar amounts that are out there. This is a long list, and I just want to go through and kind of take us down as to what are kind of required for us to do. Some end up being contracts of things that we need to go through and do. Mandated by statute is to fund the local behavioral mental health center at $1 per capita in the county, and that's why you have seen $169,468 for 2020. You saw that for the last 3 years, and that is for Southeastern Behavioral Health Care. I would anticipate that probably by about 2022, you're going to see that number take a jump up as the population will have changed. Underneath contract and dues, you have animal control. Minnehaha County has a responsibility to take care of things that are going on with the county and outside of the city of Sioux Falls for animals that may be stray or of particular concern out there. And we have that contract with the Sioux Falls Area Humane Society. And next year, the request is just up a little bit, is up $1,500 from what we've had in the past. CCOG dues we put in there. We know that we have a membership to CCOG. You guys go to meetings, I think, almost monthly for CCOG. Planning and also the Highway Department has a lot of interface with them that they provide either facilitation for grants or the path for grants and dollars to come through. CCOG dues are expected to be $25,638. The Sioux Empire Fair Association, the county is privileged to own the land where the fairgrounds is at. And you know there's a lot of buildings that are out there, and you know that there's year-round activities that go on. The past couple years, you have funded $150,000 in general funds to assist with essentially the management that's out there, because when Mark speaks, you will hear there's a different building fund activity that goes into there. They've requested an additional $100,000 for $250,000. The IVC housing at Carroll Institute, I'll take a minute to explain why you're seeing a decrease in that. Several years ago, we had concerns with detox, and we had some issues that were going on. And one of the things that this commission and my predecessor did is look at options to go through and address that. And I've always given all of those people kudos for working with Carroll Institute, who stepped up at that particular time and was willing to put a contract together on very short notice to do essentially beds or provide a place for people to be who were no longer needing to detox but had not gotten their bed yet for treatment. That originally started off with 8 beds, and that was a contract for a little over $200,000. Since that time, we've seen the numbers drop, so we dropped that contract to half of $111,000 and for 4 beds. And this year, Commissioner Karski sits on the Detox Advisory Board, so has been involved with those numbers. We've seen the numbers continue to drop a little bit, and so we felt that we would go through and do just those 2 beds. We very much have said to Carroll Institute that if there's a reason, if there's additional beds that something suddenly happens, you need to go through and talk to us and work with us, because obviously we would need to rework financials a little bit at this point. But we had a good year of trends.
And this is just our guarantee.
Yes. Yes, that we would have. Also in there, you have $2,500 for agribusinesses. Ambulance services is $195,000. Those are $65,000 requests from Del Rapids, Garrett's, and Humboldt. We do not have a financial request in from Jasper or from MedStar. So those are the totals that you do have. We do have ambulances tentatively scheduled for June 19th to do some individual review on them at that time. Medical director is Dr. Luther, who gave a great report this morning for us. Children's Inn requested an increase of $120,000 to $210,000. The Compass Center, you've been funding them at $35,000, and they were here last week and did a presentation as to what their plans are. That money was originally funded by Minnehaha County in order to do counseling sessions, group work, that type of thing, with people who have not been the victims, but rather have been the person who has abused somebody else. It's a very narrow focus type of programming that's out there, and Compass Center is, what they would have in place is to walk away from that and turn that over to Lutheran Social Services. It's a good transition that we've been looking at. You heard them talk about it, and that's why you see an increase down there for Lutheran Social Services, which you have not seen that request before. It is specifically for those dollars for that program. The rest of the dollars I think you see are pretty standard between the nonprofits. Most of them are very small amounts that you go through and see. And out of that, for 2019, out of $840,000 that you spent, about $700,000 of that is really required either statutorily, or you got to take care of it, like the animal issues or your ambulance work that you go through and do. The last thing that I would just mention is the Domestic Abuse Fund, and what you're really looking for there is a split. Those are based upon actuals from marriage fees and divorce fees, and the auditor's office, you guys pay that 3 times a year, is it? Am I correct on that? 3 times a year that they figure that number out and then pay those dollars out to those organizations. And they do pretty well in coming up with that. But $75,000 has been pretty close the last couple of years is what they'd had. But the major thing for you to consider is that 40-40-20. 40% to Children's Inn, 40% to Family Visitation Center, and 20% to Compass Center.
So I was a little confused about this when Compass Center was presenting. When we've got these 2 different pots of money that go to the Compass Center,
Yes.
Are either of them specifically tagged to this program that's moving to
The
LSS?
Lutheran Social Service dollars are,
So that would be the Compass Center
Yes.
dollars up above that were for
yes.
Were for
that are tagged
35?
down there.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't understand that, because that's kind of my question as far as,
The dollars that you've been giving to the Compass Center
Yeah.
would go away then and would just be used for Lutheran Social Services.
so is that why the Compass Center was asking for more money this year?
I think they were just in that unknown category at that part yet. They would like to have a commitment from the county that those dollars would go towards Lutheran Social Services as they work through that transition.
So all of our money right now that is tagged for Compass Center, including the Domestic Abuse
Nope.
Fund? No, okay.
No,
that's what I'm
not
trying-
including the domestic violence, correct?
Okay, so we would still, if we chose to, and we kept the splits the way they are, there would be some Domestic Abuse Fund money that would go to the Compass Center.
Correct.
Okay.
At least that's been my understanding from what they've talked to me about.
Commissioner Heiberger?
One more comment to that. and I'm not suggesting we change the percentages, but I think that we have the latitude to change the percentages, because I think we did a few years
You
ago.
have, you have. At one point, those dollars all used to go to children's
Yep, and we changed it.
in. At one point, they did, and then Compass Center came in, and you guys decided to include that, and then probably about 3 years ago or so, you put the family visitation in as a percentage also.
Any other questions about that slide? Okay.
And for the last one, I'm going to turn over to Mark Krenz, our Facilities Director, who's going to take you through what his, can I say your list is? Yeah, what your list is. There you go. Do you need my, oh, you
No,
got your sheet,
I got
okay.
mine. Good afternoon, Commission. 2020 Building Fund has a little over 1.3 million scheduled for projects. Like every year, there's several smaller annual maintenance projects that we do, tuck pointing, roof repairs, inspections, carpet, parking repairs. A couple of larger projects I'll be working on, like every year, the fair improvements. The parking lot to the east is where I'm gonna focus most of my time. It's in pretty poor shape, so kind of see where that lands, but I also have expo efficiencies to work on, underground utility replacement out there, bleacher seating in the grandstands, tree removal. So fair amount of work yet to do out there. Also, the JDC roof replacement. The newest section of that roof is 23 years old. Several leaks. It's in poor condition, a lot of deterioration, so I'm planning to get that replaced next year. Then I've also had quite a bit of interest in security upgrades, so we've been doing a few smaller projects, some camera replacement. We did a little work over at the PDO. They got a small piece of security glass, so now the clients can get buzzed in, so it's not a, come in as you please. Looking at some additional cameras around the campus, working with Monty from IT on some of those projects. And then the other main thing I'll be working on, towards the mid-end of 2020 is finalizing the design for the energy plant chiller replacement. So those are kind of some of the highlights. Do you have any questions on any of the other projects?
Are there any questions for Mark? I know we had a chance to go over this in the building committee.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barth.
So Mark, the fair has their own request in for funding, so this would be above what they're asking for. This is on your budget.
Correct.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. All right, so we are ahead of schedule, and if you guys are okay, I might put the break off for a little bit. Just keep going, plowing through. So we'll, I think we'll go ahead and at least do Monty's presentation. He's going to do a short presentation on the new Munis demonstration.
Yeah, so exercise number one
Turn on the
is to
laptop.
log into your Windows laptops there. So you should have your password up there. Let's make sure we can all do that. Otherwise, we might need a little break. While you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So Monty Wattenbach with Minnehaha County IT Department. And I've just been asked to give you just a quick demo of Munis so that you'll be able to go into departments' budgets to look at individual line items, potentially previous purchases, those kinds of things. Has everyone been able to log in? Okay, good.
Those that haven't aren't going to fess up anyways.
What's that?
No one can see what I'm looking at.
All right, so I think you're already logged into Munis once you log into Windows there. You will have a purple-ish set of directions. Mine aren't purple, but the ones that Carol printed out for you are purple-ish. I'm colorblind, so they could be blue, they could be purple, I'm not quite sure. There's three basic sections to that document. It's 3 pages, mostly pictures. First page is getting started. If you get lost, confused, just close out of everything, and on your desktop, you'll have a Munis little icon that looks like this guy here at the top. If you close out of everything. You're already in Munis, so you'll have a screen that looks like the one there at the bottom, minus the little notifications thing. I took that off because you won't actually be approving anything through there. But mostly what you'll have is icons over there, or links, I should say, over there on the left-hand side. Okay, I'll mention a few of them. In a moment, we'll go into the one that I circled in red that says Central Budget Entry. But for the time being, I just wanted to mention a couple of the other ones. There's Account Central. That will let you go in and view department's current year budget. Okay, so this year's 2019 budget and expenses that they've had towards that budget. You can even drill down into invoices that we've paid, vendors that we work with, those kinds of things in Account Central. AP Invoice Central would let you go in and search for invoices based on a vendor name or an invoice number or what have you. And then Vendor Central, where you could go in and you could search for vendors and any transactions that we've had with those vendors. So I just mentioned those, not necessarily that you need to go into them, but you certainly have the ability to do that. Below that then, like I said, circled in red is the Central Budget Entry. So we'll go ahead and click on that. I'll do the same thing here as well. When you do that, I'll point out that notice at the top of the screen there you have two web browser tabs open now. So I could open that and I could go back to my home page here and I could click on another link if I want. I can have multiple tabs open. Super helpful if you have more than one monitor. You can drag some of them over. But for our purpose here, we have just the Central Budget Entry screen open there. And your user account has global read access. So what I mean by that is you can't go in here and change things or do things. You won't be expected to do that. But you do have access to all departments' expense accounts. So there's a lot of stuff. If you had to click through the pages down there at the bottom, notice you have, pages 1 through 5 plus some arrows here. You'd spend all day clicking through there to get through all the individual expense line items for all the various budgets. So that brings us to page 2 of the instructions where we can filter for the department that we're looking for. Okay, and I believe the jail is the first on the list when we get done here, right? So we'll just kind of go through an exercise where we'll open up the jail's budget here in the Central Budget Entry. So if you kind of follow along and click on the advanced, and if I lose you, I'll circle back around with you and get you caught up. But up there towards the upper left, we have an advanced button. Click on that. Brings us to a screen that you see on my screen. And then towards the middle, right over here, we have a department. If you click on the little magnifying glass to the right of department, and then the drop-down arrow, we see all the various different departments. If we scroll down, I don't know what jail's number is here, but just scroll down, looks like they're 2120 on jail. And then we'll click on OK 2 different times there. This will filter the accounts that we're looking at, the expense accounts, to just the jails. Oh. Yeah, so let me jump back to this. So I'm going to click on Advanced again up here in the upper left. Already have jail selected, and then for my account type, we're going to just select expense and we'll hide the revenues. A lot of departments aren't going to have very many revenues, but the jail probably has more than most. If you followed along, the jail org is 2120 with 3 zeros at the end, and then those objects are the individual line items starting with full-time salaries. If I've lost you, I will, like I said, circle back around and get you up to speed. So that brings us to the third page of your handout. Third page of your handout is just viewing additional details, documents, and notes. So notice over here on the left-hand side, I've got these little pluses and these pencils, little icons on the left. If there's a plus or a pencil, that means there's no additional notes or details for that line item. Okay, many of them don't necessarily necessitate additional descriptions or what have you. But if you have a little note symbol, like I show in the directions, instead of a pencil, that means there's notes associated with that particular expense line item, and you can click on that and see whatever notes the department wanted to pass along with that line item. And if you see, I don't even know what to call that little symbol. Instead of the plus symbol, if you see that other little icon that I depict in the directions or that we see over here, that means that this line item has additional details in it. And if you click on those additional details, sometimes that particular line item is broke down into specific individual items that total this line item. If I go into salary reimbursements here, this one looks like it just had one, but in some situations you could potentially have multiple different line items with details that total the sum of the previous one. I'm going to click on return to go back to this one. I don't think there's a lot of documents attached. If there's some departments that do have attached documents, I'm going to stay here and I will help you navigate and find those. I don't want to jump too deep into the weeds at this point, but departments have the ability to attach documents to any one of these line items if they want to.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So when I look at this, I can look at 2019 actuals, but then when it says 2019 projected, that is all blank. Is that just a feature we don't use?
So yes, the projected, since we weren't on Munis last year, doesn't really apply. So I'm going to do this. I think if I change my columns and turn that off, projected actuals, okay. It won't refresh your screen right away, I don't believe, but the next time you come in here, it will take that column out.
Okay.
Another tip that I want to give you is if you, and this is not a tip just in Munis, but it's in a web browser in general, if you hold down the control key and use the wheel on your mouse, not to click, but to wheel up or down, you can zoom this in or out. I've zoomed out a really long ways. I can't read that good anymore. So I'm going to zoom back in. These past couple of years, I can't see as good as I used to be able to, so we can zoom in. So control and then use the wheel to zoom in or out. Okay, so again, that's not necessarily a Munis feature, but certainly helpful to be able to zoom in or out. Cindy, I would use the wheel on your actual other mouse versus the one on your laptop. If you're trying to use the mouse pad on your laptop, will be very difficult. I would recommend using the actual physical separated mouse. It has a wheel, so control and then wheel in or out, and it will zoom you in or out of whatever screen that you're on. I don't know that you'll need any more columns than what's here, but there's an additional count columns button here that lets you turn on additional columns. I don't think you're going to need that, but since we've only been on Munis for a little over a year now, we have invoices and that kind of data basically from May of last year through this point. And then we have some more migrated data with the numbers, but not necessarily attached invoices and stuff like that behind it. But with that being said, any questions? And like I said, I will be here. I'll probably make sure that you're all finding what you need to. Did everyone get to the jail's budget requests?
I didn't.
Okay,
But-
I will come over to help you. We'll get you there. Sure. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so for those of you that are here, again, notice at the top I have 2 tabs open. So let's just leave this one open and go back to the main left web browser tab. Okay, and we're going to go to Central Budget Entry, which is going to open a 3rd tab. And then we're going to click on that Advanced button up in the upper left. For the department, we're going to click on the magnifying glass to the right of the department, then the drop-down arrow, and I think Carol said the sheriff's office will be next. What was that?
2110.
And then, okay, I do want to probably pick the account type of expense. And then okay. Okay, so now in this tab I have the sheriff's office accounts up here in central budget entry. On my second or center tab, I have the jail. And if I go back to that first tab, I could again bring up another one if I wanted, or navigate somewhere else in the software and keep those other 2 up and open. Okay, questions?
Okay,
All right, thanks for your time.
thank you. So why don't we take about a 10-minute break, and then we can, anybody that needs help from Monty can take advantage of it, and then we'll go ahead and start with the presentations from the sheriff and the state's attorney's office.
Thank you.
I'm giving it to Jean.
won the race. All right, so we're going to go ahead and reconvene, and we have the privilege of having the Sheriff's Department up next.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I have good news and bad news. The good news is you're learning how to use Munis. The bad news is the jail is not the first budget up for you, so we're going to do emergency management. Now, all of our stuff is in Dropbox as well, and that might be easier to go through right now, but that's up to you. Because I have 7 budgets to present to you and about 30 minutes to try to kind of walk through them, we're at your request going to kind of capitalize and key on the important issues, primarily personnel purchase or personnel changes and requests, any major changes that we see, revenue changes, some of which you've heard of. And so I'm going to have several people get up and present, but we will be respectful of your time and try to keep within that 30 minutes. So our Emergency Management Director, Jason Gierman, will give the emergency management budget. Michelle Boyd, Chief Deputy, will give the Sheriff's Office, Southeast Tech, Air Guard, and the airport security budget. Warden Gromer will give the jail and the 24/7 budget, and Captain Bosman will give revenue highlights. So with that, Jason.
Jason Gierman with Emergency Management. Do you have this sheet here?
I'm still on the computer.
Well, being you're experts in Munis, maybe you could switch over to Emergency Management.
My own assistant.
If you'd get off Netflix, you wouldn't have a problem.
I will.
Jason, just as the sheriff mentioned, I mean, we're really focused on new positions, and so you
Okay.
can give a pretty high level.
It will be a
Okay.
very quick one, but
Okay.
basically, our full-time salaries have dropped about $67,000 based on the restructuring. If you were to see what I'm looking at here, there's some items that I reduced in our budget to reflect actual usage. For example, postage, just some office supply things, and basically just to reflect what we've actually been using as a pattern over the years. So basically, all I'm asking for is I'm trying to get a new vehicle for replacement for a Dodge Durango that we have for Doug Blomker, the Assistant Director, and we're asking for the $18,000 to attempt to buy a possibly a used SUV of some sort. So basically, a total savings of with salaries is $776,683 for an actual increase, I think it is, of $2,600 of 1.94%.
Any questions for Jason? I think I got Munis. I see what you have. I also had a hard copy, so
Okay.
I think.
Pretty
Thank
simple.
you very
Thanks.
much.
I'm going to have Joe drive Munis here for me. Michelle Boyd, Sheriff's Office, Southeast Tech. We're going to start with the Southeast Tech security budget. As you know, we have a number of pass-through budgets for the Sheriff's Office, so I'll hit on those 3 first before we go into the Sheriff's Office budget.
What number is that?
2180.
Thanks.
What?
The accountant in him.
Let me know when you're ready.
Oh, we're ready. Go ahead.
Okay. Out at Southeast Tech, they're authorized 3 full-time people, but they're doing the services out there currently with 2 positions, and they've continued to do that over the last couple of years and plan to continue moving forward. We did hire away one of their Southeast Tech officers onto patrol, so had to rehire back, but we've rehired a PD officer, a retired PD officer. So he is starting out at Southeast Tech. So those are the basic changes that you see in this budget. The group insurance is a little bit higher, but the overall department total is $3,234 above the 2019 budget. And as we said, Southeast Tech reimburses us fully for that budget. Are there any questions with that one? Next, we'll do airport security. That sounds like a guess. Can you see it? Yep, I got it. Okay.
Thank you.
In this budget, you'll see that we're actually coming in a little lower this year than last year. We've made a few adjustments based on what they've been spending. We do have a couple of increases. It's for the 2.5% increases to part-time salary, and also for a couple ballistic vests and equipment that we need out there. Same as Southeast Tech, this budget is a pass-through through the airport. We've been managing that now for a couple years, and it's going really well. We feel that they're providing a really good service out there for the airport, and we plan to continue to do so in the futures coming up. Any questions on that one? And last pass-through budget is the Air Guard. The Air Guard has increased their staffing from 12 officers to 16 officers, and so we've been hiring for that increase. They are going to use less guardsmen and more of our Air Guard security officers to cover the base out there. So some of the changes that you see to that just basically go along with that staffing increase for your Social Security, retirement, group insurance, those types of things. And then we did take the object numbers 27005 and we combined them into one under other charges. So that's the change you see there, just a minimal change. The department total increase is $295,782, which will be completely absorbed through our Air Guard contract. Any questions there? Okay, we'll move on to the Sheriff's Office budget. Okay, I'll draw your attention to the full-time salaries object number 411000. Earlier this year in April, we had come in and asked for approval for a grant to fund a deputy sheriff for the COPS anti-methamphetamine program. So we've done that. However, that's funded through that grant through the state. We also came in May and asked for a position, the program and services position, that we're funding based off of the savings we're seeing in the emergency management budget and offsetting some of that cost through the 24/7 budget. The one position, as Carol had mentioned, that we're asking for is to reclass deputy sheriff to a patrol sergeant. The reason for that is because we have identified the need for additional coverage on nights for our patrol division. Currently, we have one supervisor working on kind of a flex shift. We'd like to be able to have a sergeant on each night shift for better coverage. Our caseload and our calls for service are continuing to rise. The types of calls that we're going on are getting more dangerous, and so we feel that we need better supervision 7 days a week rather than Wednesday through Saturday. So that is one of our requests. The cost to reclassify that position comes in at $7,467. The next item that I'll point out is object number 419000. It's salary reimbursement. We haven't seen that in our budgets prior to this year. We've put that in there on the auditor's office suggestion. It just shows the money that we're moving from the 24/7 to the sheriff's office budget for reimbursement for that position that we discussed, the program and services position. So that's why you see that line item in our budget this year.
I'm looking for that one. Where's that one at?
It'd be 419000. It's called salary reimbursement.
Oh.
It'd be a,
I'm better with pictures than numbers.
I know, this is in your Dropbox too, if that's easier for you to follow. And then I'll go down to 424000. It's the lease and rental agreement for the law enforcement center. In 2019, the city had identified that they are using a full-time city maintenance person at the LEC that they haven't been budgeting for. The building's getting older, the needs are getting higher. So we didn't have that budget in 2019 when they finalized their budget, so they allowed us to forego that. However, we needed to put it in the 2020 budget. So that is a increase of 19,500 due to that maintenance personnel. We pay 14.51% of the total cost of that building, and the city pays the remainder of those costs. It's been a good partnership that we've had with the city. The next item is 426065, uniform allowance. The main increase in that line item is due to the replacement of SWAT vests. Every 5 years, we need to replace those SWAT vests. And so that's replacing 12 new vests at the cost of about just over $3,000 a vest. And the last larger line item that we have would be our automobiles, 434400. As you recall, each year we've been allowed to replace 6 of our patrol SUVs that we surplus due to the mileage and the wear and tear of using those vehicles pretty much 24/7, 365 a year. We were able to use the City of Sioux Falls bid to purchase these at a better price due to the volume of the purchase. So those come in at $33,500 per vehicle. Other than that, do you have any questions on that? No?
I get down to 434320. Oh, page 2, okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm on page 2.
So other than that, in the sheriff's office budget, other than some minor adjustments up and down, those are our major requests for the sheriff's office side. Are there any questions with any of those changes? If not, I'll turn it over to Jeff to do the 24/7 budget and the jail budget. Thank you.
Thank you. You gonna make the argument that they saved the best for last?
No, not even gonna try. I'll let Joe kinda keep up with the Munis thing. I'm still using the spreadsheet. Just a few of them to touch base on. Obviously, I think as you saw from some of the previous presentations and conversations, the jail is asking for 12 new corrections officers in training to staff the expanded portion of the jail. What's happening is we're going to be able to occupy the 5th floor of the expansion this year, here within a couple of months. That has no impact on the current staffing. So we're occupying that portion without adding any staff. The staff I'm requesting to hire in 2020 is to occupy the main floor, the ground level floor of the east expansion. If you recall correctly, the commission approved me to hire 6 of the 18 total that's needed to staff that in the 4th quarter of 2019, and that's in the 2019 budget, and we'll obviously start to try to recruit and hire those folks at that point in time. The second staffing request we have out of the jail is for 1 corrections officer in training to staff a additional court security position. We've seen that the workload for the courthouse has continued to increase from year to year, and it's been an ongoing discussion between the sheriff, chief deputy, and I as to whether or not to request that position, and this year it's just gotten to the point where I think that position's necessary with that increased workload. Jail, that's jail. The next item to talk about in the jail is the 419000, the staffing reimbursements. That's a little bit of a change from what we've seen previously. That's a new object number that hasn't been included in the jail's budget previously. What I'm trying to accomplish with this is in the new jail, when that's open and occupied, the jail staff and the 24/7 staff are gonna be sharing that program space in the new facility. That allows me to use some staff members in the jail who are on shift, working on the jail shift to help cover some of that 24/7 workload. Historically, for years, the jail's been doing the bulk of all of the UAs that are done through the 24/7 office. This puts that jail staff in 24/7 office and kind of intertwines them a little bit more than what they have been. So this is, I'm trying to reimburse the jail for some of the work that they provide toward the 24/7 project. And I'll talk about that again, the salary reimbursements again in the 24/7 budget. Most of the object numbers are various lines through the jail budget are pretty self-explanatory. The next one that I'd really like to point out is the contract services, which is 422145. That includes our contract with Armor, our healthcare contract, as well as a couple of smaller contracts. But over 2017 and 2018, we were substantially over budgeted in this line item 2 years in a row. If you recall correctly, I wanted to carry over some of the funding from 2018 to 2019 to use for some jail expansion costs, which you approved. So I asked that Armor will go through their budgeting process and really take a look at our previous utilization along with the staffing matrix that they had been using to make sure it was comparable to what we were actually staffed at. And they came back with a projection which is $300,000 less than the previous years. So that's very good. It's nice to see a $300,000 deduction in the jail's budget. We don't often see that. That's a fairly aggressive number. I'd like to see that it's that much lower, and I'll continue to monitor that through the course of the year as their contract continues on. Next item worth noting is 42400. That's the lease rental agreements. You'll see some reduction in that. The reduction's primarily due to a couple of things. It's a battery backup system that we were going to be scheduled to replace. We're not going to have to do that now because this is part of the expansion project and it'll come in with those costs. The second portion is the elevator service agreement. Mark and I have had numerous discussions over these elevators, and every elevator in the county campus system is under Mark's budget, and we just thought it makes more sense for him to manage them under those. Next one would be a couple of different object numbers is the inmate supplies and the kitchen and cleaning supplies, 426135 and 426140. We see some about $33,000 worth of increases in those two object numbers, and those are simply based on the projected increase in the number of inmates. Once we occupy that 5th floor and then later in 2020 occupy the transitional housing space in the new jail, that's going to be an increase in inmates, which is obviously going to cause some increases in our inmate supply costs to go up. Kind of the same explanation on the next one to point out, which is the Board of Prisoners costs, so the inmate meals, that's 426175. That shows some increase due to the increased cost of the meals and then some additional increase on that based on the increased number of inmates.
Jeff, on
Yes.
428010 water and sewer?
Yes.
How can you go from 26,000 to 600?
That's where I'm going
Are
next.
they gonna die of thirst or?
Next item on the list is to talk about that. The next thing I wanted to talk about after the Board of Prisoners, the inmate meals, was bowl 428000, 428005, and 428, the water sewer one. What number is that? 010. Those are costs that were all associated with operating the correction center. So you can see the natural gas. Let me look at them so I make sure I'm.
$6,000 less.
Natural gas shows a deduction. Electricity doesn't change a whole lot, but there's some, and the increase on that one is based off the increase in the jail. With the jail expansion, we'll be doing electricity for all of that. But the decrease for natural gas And the substantial decrease for water is we're all but able to eliminate service out there. So what costs there are there is just to maintain the service. Those are corrections center specific costs and don't affect the downtown operation. Last item to talk about on the jail is the automobiles, and simply to say we're not requesting an automobile this year. We've requested and received authorization to purchase one each of the last 2 years, and this year we can go without. Yes?
Commissioner Heiberger.
So you still have natural grass out at the CCC, because it isn't inhabitable, so.
We need to maintain it just to keep the temperature from freezing. So it'll be substantially less than what it is, but the building's just expensive to maintain at a reasonable temperature. Mark, what are we keeping it at out there? Do you know off the top of your head?
16 winter.
Yeah, so it's not.
Any questions for the warden?
Do you want me to move right into jail revenue now, or go through 24/7 and do revenue separate, or how would you?
I think it'd be helpful to go right into revenue.
The jail
just-
revenue?
Yeah, so that, because
Okay.
there is some relationship between your,
Correct. The big item on revenue, the easy one is we're projecting the phone commission to go up a little bit. And I think we've got about $100,000 increase projected in that revenue. And that's basically just based off of our current revenue numbers along with an increase in our projected number of inmates. The big one for the jail revenue is the Board of Prisoners or the inmate housing. With the contract with Lincoln County that we'll be able to implement and have in effect here later this year, for 2020, we're projecting about a $1.3 million increase in inmate revenues. That's a fairly conservative number, I think, as to what our bed availability is gonna be. I'm just not comfortable projecting that much higher because I'm not sure what, if any, sort of spike we're gonna have in our own Minnehaha County inmates once the jail is completed. What our intention to do with that available bed space is, clearly we're contracted with Lincoln County to take on the 45, which accounts for this $1.3 million increase. The total revenue projection is 1.7, I believe, million. So that's, and the increase of the 1.3 million accounts for that 45 beds from Lincoln County. When we open that jail, we try to maintain it at about an 85% occupancy rate. You've heard me talk about the peaking and classification previously. So if I end up with 20 quote-unquote extra beds that I can fill up without increasing the staffing burden and still stay within that 85% occupancy rate, we're going to rent those beds. I mean, we're gonna go out and find, Moody County's gonna take them. Lincoln County may have more inmates that wanna house them. The Marshal Service is always looking for places to house inmates. So we're really gonna manage that population as the best we can with staying within our peaking and classification factor, but yet trying to ensure that we're up to our full occupancy, including that peaking rate.
so Warden Gromer, I think we've talked about this, but I can't absolutely be certain. And the commission hasn't had as much opportunity to learn about we're gonna be coming forward with a proposal to replace the security system in the existing jail, and part of that plan is that you're gonna have, once we open the new addition next
Okay.
year in 2020, that you're gonna move people back and forth. Does this revenue projection include the fact that some of those beds were gonna be used by our prisoners while we empty a floor to try to?
No, because what we're talking about is when the east expansion is completely done, we're gonna have the ground level, which requires the posts that I'm asking to hire for this year. Then we're gonna have the second level, which is a new unit control, which we're not requesting staffing to house and manage that. So then I take inmates from one of the current unit controls in the current jail and move the inmates and the staff into the new. So there's no adjustment in beds, there's no adjustment in staffing, and then we're able to do that security electronics upgrade in the existing jail. Once that portion's complete, we move inmates from a portion that hasn't been upgraded to the portion that has, and just move through the facility that way. So I don't see there being a large impact on the number of available beds we will or won't have at that time. The big driver on the numbers of available beds we're gonna have is the numbers of Minnehaha County inmates, and as to whether that goes up or down with the completion of the new jail.
Okay. Other questions?
All right.
And Just as a reminder too, I mean, this is pretty much in line with some of the projections we had when we were very first talking about the jail and the positions and the offsetting revenue, so.
It is. It's all fairly close, and I know you and I have been fortunate enough to get to talk about it a lot more so than everybody else. But if there's questions, feel free. I'll try to answer them best I can.
Okay.
All right. Next one is the 24/7 budget, far quicker than what the jail one will be. There's really two items I'd like to point out of the 24/7 budget. In 411010, which is the part-time salaries, you see a $40,000+ deduction in that, with a $62,000 or so increase in the salary reimbursements. That's what I was talking about, the jail and the 24/7 office being more intertwined. So once we move into the new jail, we're going to be using more full-time jail staff to staff that programs area of the new jail and rely less on part-time staff through the 24/7 office. So there's still part-time hours available at the 24/7 office, obviously why we continue to keep some money budgeted there. But those components of the jail, how it currently works is 24/7 is really pretty separate from jail operations. Obviously they interact, but with the new jail, they're going to kind of become more of a single entity working together a little bit more closely than what they currently do. So those salary reimbursements allow us to take some of the money from 24/7 that jail staff is providing work toward 24/7 and reimburse that back into the jail's budget. 24/7 in the jail, it's just with the being part of that program section of the new jail, we have the various programs, the electronic monitoring work release we run out of the jail, the walk-in warrant program we run out of the jail. Those right now are kind of separate from the 24/7 office. How we're doing them right now is we're operating those programs out of the old sheriff's office front desk in the public safety building, and then the 24/7 office stays in the space where they're currently working out of. Once we go to the new jail, they come together into the same workspace, and then we're able to share some staff between the two. As far as 24/7 revenue projections go, there's a slight decrease in the revenue projected for 24/7 from 2018 to 2019, and that's based on our current utilization and processes. 24/7 revenue continues to be a little bit sluggish. It's not increasing at the same rate that we're seeing some of the costs in 24/7 increase, and it's primarily staffing costs that continue to drive the 24/7 costs up, as well as the testing costs. The tests that we're doing now, the PBTs are holding fairly steady, but what we're seeing is a lot of the drug-type testing becoming more and more prevalent, which that's more labor-intensive. It just requires more to do the tests than we did with the PBTs. But 24/7 is still very, very efficient program. It's just costs are continuing to creep up a little bit.
Questions?
All right.
So,
I'm going to quick do a touch on the revenue for the sheriff's office side of things. So this covers our pistol permits, small town fees, miscellaneous revenue, warrant fees, fingerprinting, mobile home distress warrants, all these processes that take place within the sheriff's office that we can collect a fee or recoup some fees for. The pistol permit fees, we're projecting $5,000 less in 2020 than anticipated in 2019. Part of that is there's the constitutional carry law that is going into effect. We're not quite sure exactly how that's going to impact those who decide not to come get a concealed pistol permit. However, we want to work on educating the public that there's still going to be needed for reciprocity outside of the state of South Dakota, which is going to be a benefit for many people. I'd want to encourage to still look at that option. Small town fees is something that we recoup for the contract services that we provide to the 8 communities, as well as 1 deputy sheriff that they reimburse us for out in Hartford. The warrant fees have gone down continually over the year. Again, that was kind of as a change from the court system, where a lot of these fail to pay fine warrants have been turned over to a collection agency versus an actual warrant. Instead of locking people up for not paying their fines, we're going to come at them a different way of either suspending their driver's license, locking up their vehicle registration, hitting them on that side of things. Fingerprinting fees holding about steady, as well as some of our civil processes as well. One thing that was added in here was a revenue for the reimbursement from our cops camp grant position for deputy sheriff that was approved a couple months ago. So that is included in the revenue, but then is offset with the expenditures of that position in the full-time salaries. Yes.
Why did you anticipate parking tickets going up by $3,000?
Well, we've been a little more proactive in enforcing
That's fine. I
the
just
county
was
parking
curious.
permits,
It's like,
and
wow, that's a lot.
we have a very
Car Cindy.
we have a parking lot attendant who's very good at his job, and he finds cars, a lot of cars.
That's fine.
Some of you may have encountered him, so he's very
Mine a few times.
very pleasant individual. Please leave him a note, and he'll leave you one back.
Any other questions?
That wraps up our 7 budgets. We try to focus primarily on the key items and the personnel. I kind of have a advantage sometimes, in my mind, when I look at my budget as the sheriff's office budget and the jail budget and go, well, I need these officers, which I do. I need them very much. And I'm going to offset that revenue by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But as I said and watched the overall presentation, I also have great respect for the other department heads that aren't in the department of having revenue. And so, these are difficult decisions for the commission when you decide whether you're gonna have to opt out, what's gonna happen with at the end of the day with your budget process. I think, as the Warden Gromer said, we're very conservative in our revenue estimates, but we really wanna get that 5th floor open, get things adjusted, get a sense for where are we at with our 85% occupancy. And I know the U.S. Marshal and I met recently. If Turner and Lincoln and McCook and our other partner counties don't have enough inmates to give us, we'll certainly go with the Marshal, and we'll work in a business model to keep those available beds that we don't have to open up another whole floor. We'll try to keep those full because we recognize it greatly impacts the revenue to the county, which impacts all of our departments, not just ours. So, any questions for me? Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you very much, all of you. Okay, so that takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is a presentation by the State's Attorney's Office, Aaron McGowan.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. In the past decade, I think I've always come forward with a PowerPoint trying to illustrate crime rates, caseloads, and things of that nature. I don't know that that was always the most effective way of communication. I come before you today without any PowerPoint or any notes. I do have a stack of crime stats and caseloads that are available to me. I wanted to talk to you more on a individual one-on-one basis, or I guess more of a 1-on-5 basis. Obviously, I've made some bold requests as far as staffing needs, and I want to try to illustrate for you today what those needs are and some of the extreme obstacles and hurdles that my office faces on a daily basis. I'll start with what I think, or at least in my opinion, is the easiest area excuse me, to illustrate, and that is the digital discovery aspect of what we do. By law, my office is tasked with the responsibility of providing discovery to the defense. We don't have a choice in that. As you know, as county commissioners, there are numerous unfunded mandates from the legislature, and I certainly don't envy any of you in making these difficult decisions as far as requests from all the different departments. My office receives multiple unfunded mandates. If you look at Marcy's Law, if you look at our discovery responsibilities, the fact that we have to type up all of the judgments and orders for the circuit court judges, we don't have a choice in any of those matters. Those are tasks that we are obligated to undertake. As far as digital discovery, if you look at just in the last 4 years, we've gone from copying 38,000 some videos to projected 175,000 videos this year. As I think most of you know, we had a volunteer throughout the last several months that will no longer be in that department, so we'll go from 4 to 3 as of this month. So we'll be at will be down 25% our manpower as far as providing that digital discovery. This is a challenge that comes from numerous different moving parts as far as different agencies we work with, different businesses in town that have proprietary surveillance, home surveillance. But this is something that I believe is a system-wide request, because if my office can't provide that discovery to the defense, they can't show it to their client. That case gets stalled in the system, and we slow down the entire criminal justice process. So in my opinion, this request, I hope, is one of the easier ones to illustrate to you as what it does system-wide for my office to be able to provide what we are obligated to do, which has become very, very complex in the last several years. So we are requesting 2 digital discovery techs. I don't know that that'll get us to full staff in that area. It'll replace the volunteer that we had and get us 1 additional tech to help fulfill those responsibilities. There are times that we get 4 to 5 weeks behind in providing electronic discovery. I want to cut down that lag time. I want to have that provided as soon as possible so that these cases can continue to flow through the criminal justice process. You also see that I asked for 2 attorneys, a legal assistant, and a paralegal. And again, I won't hit you with all the crime stats and caseloads, but we are at a point where we are absolutely bursting at the seams. I have legitimate concerns that we will at some point implode or have a mass exodus of lawyers. We are losing wonderful, wonderful prosecutors because of the strain that their caseload puts on them. I can tell you from experience that these cases and this job is very mentally, physically, and emotionally draining. And when you have a caseload of 650 that you're trying to prioritize and have some life balance, it's impossible. So we've lost really good people. We will continue to lose very good lawyers because of our staffing. We are understaffed if you look at the numbers countywide, and I don't want to be adversarial with our other attorney offices within the county, but we have fewer attorneys than the other 2 combined legal offices that we have in the county. We have fewer paralegals than the other 2 combined offices. Those offices combined handle approximately 75% of our caseload. We take on over 100 private attorneys every year that are either retained or appointed. So we're taking on not only more county indigent defense attorneys, but the private bar as well. And we have so many more responsibilities as the prosecutor's office as far as probable cause hearings with the 6 grand juries that we have, typing up the indictments, the complaints, the informations, the subpoenas, the victim witness services that we provide, the discovery we provide, the specialty courts that we staff, the Veterans Court, the Drug Court, DWI Court, soon to be Mental Illness Court. The circuit is adding another circuit court judge. I did the background checks with the JDQ last week, so we'll have another judge to appear in front of. These hurdles and obstacles have put us in an almost impossible position. I looked at our caseloads this morning. I literally have a misdemeanor prosecutor that has 1,100 cases assigned to him right now. I have felony attorneys that have been in the office 20 years that have over 550 felony cases assigned to them. That we are not at a responsible staffing level to provide the level of services that we should be providing to our county. We do not have the support staff necessary to assist our attorneys so that they can increase efficiency and not do non-attorney tasks. When we talked about opting out, and I do support you in an opt-out, I don't see how we could possibly manage a minimal level of services with what you currently have for money available to you. And unfortunately, the legislature has put you in an impossible position with our funding mechanism to try to complete all of the unfunded mandates that we receive as a county. But when you look at an opt-out, and I would consider it to be a public safety opt-out because of the sheriff's needs, I think it's important to note that our office is law enforcement as well. Not to pull rank, but I am the chief law enforcement officer of the county. Sorry, Cheryl. And public safety does not end at that time of arrest, and we've added officers throughout different agencies that we work with. But if we can't hold those offenders and those criminals accountable by prosecuting them or getting them the resources or into the specialty court or doing a diversion program, that arrest is meaningful and has no impact on public safety. I just had a murder case last week that was resolved by a plea with the murder of an 18-month-old baby that's now serving a life sentence. If I'm not successful in that case, and that's a case where I took on 3 private attorneys by myself, that's a child murder that walks. If we lose a child rape case, a child rapist walks. We are an important function of public safety, and I want to illustrate that. I looked at my current homicides, and fortunately, because we've resolved several just recently, we're down to 10 pending homicides right now in my office. 4 of those defendants are represented by a private counsel. So 40% of our murder cases have private attorneys that are not being defended by your county defender offices. So we are taking on a larger chunk of responsibility with inadequate staff. So I'm pleading with you and begging you for the help that we need, because we do perform a very important function, not only on the criminal level, but also the civil level, and our civil chief is here as well. We don't generate revenue like the sheriff does. We do generate some revenue through the civil division. They do bond forfeitures. When somebody skips out on their bond, we go after that money. We've recovered tens of thousands of dollars. I know one year we recovered $100,000 of a bond on somebody that forfeited the bond by not showing up for court. I believe our civil division does an excellent job of protecting tax dollars by fighting the good fight with whether it be hospitals or other entities or agencies, and protecting our taxpayers so that the county doesn't get stuck with as many bills as we do. But we can't generate the revenue like other departments. But we do have those needs, and I'm pleading with you to get us to a level. This doesn't get me to an appropriate staffing level. This is the minimum I need. I just think to function as an office with 13,000 cases, 2 more attorneys does very little to put a dent in that caseload, but I'm playing catch up to get to an appropriate level. And with that, I'll defer to any questions you might have.
Questions for Aaron? Commissioner Barth?
Are we seeing a continued impact from Marcy's Law?
Not continued. I think it's remained constant.
Okay.
In checking our victim witness assistant caseloads, they are generally around 300 per victim witness assistant, which is stabilized. They do still spend that extra time on those cases that we weren't staffing previously. The change in the law, I've not seen any impact in our numbers or responsibilities there. So that constitutional and voter mandate remains. We quickly adapted, and I really appreciate the help you provided us to be compliant with that at the time, but that has remained pretty constant.
Commissioner Heiberger?
So Aaron, if we gave you these employees, where do we put them? Would you just touch a little bit on where some of the employees are at this point? And obviously, we just had our building meeting this
Right.
morning talking about changes in the structure too, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I apologize, the sheriff and I had a meeting with the Secretary of Department of Corrections this morning, so I was not available for that meeting, but we did have a very productive meeting with the Secretary this morning. Currently, out of my current staff, I have 10 staff that are not in the state's attorney's office working out of satellite offices. I don't know where we would put new staff. I still have staff working out of the hallway, attorneys working out of what I would call a closet area. Our space needs are almost as great as our personnel needs. We are open to any suggestions. I know that there is a movement to help fix that. I don't know what other Band-Aids could be made. I have a few ideas that if we are successful in getting additional staff, but I need the bodies, even if they are inefficiently placed throughout the building or the campus, to do what we need to do. Okay.
Other questions? Well, Aaron,
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Barth.
what were the numbers on copying the video recordings again?
In 2015, we copied just over 38,000. We are projected to copy 175,000 this year, and those will continue to rise.
Commissioner Heiberger?
Aaron, and Commissioner Bender and I talked about it a little bit the other day, and just as things changed with the Sioux Falls PD and stuff, we continue to get more data to download, and there's no reimbursement from the city because they're not obligated to. And so, you know, if they went to body cameras or we went to them, that's more. And as there continues, like you say, to be more home security systems and stuff, we just have, or businesses have security cameras, there's just a lot more security. We did have a volunteer for a while. Is there any possibility of finding, I mean, we have a lot of volunteers that work in the county. Is there possibility of even trying to find another volunteer? I know it's a unique position, but.
We will seek one out. The one that we had was uniquely qualified and kind of a computer whiz that was kind of perfectly fitted into that environment. I can tell you that some of those downloads are difficult to watch and had an impact on that volunteer as far as some of the content. I'm certainly open. We have numerous volunteers all the time. We don't have space for them, so they kind of just wander in our hallways or shadow us. That I think that is a possibility. Part of me feels guilty that they're doing that type of work and viewing that type of content for free when others are getting paid a salary to do that, but I am certainly open to that. There could be the potential to bring back the previous volunteer at some point. I should also note that Monty suggested that we add $10,000 to our budget just for our space needs because of all the digital discovery, so that's another request that's part of our budget because of that increase.
Other questions? Oops, Commissioner Heiberger mentioned that we did have an opportunity to visit with you, which I really appreciated. And I warned you that I'd be asking you this. As you've seen, even if we just do half of our positions, which is really translates into jail positions that we've pretty much already committed to, and that gives us 4 other positions. You've asked for more than that yourself. Can you give us any idea about priorities if we had to, I mean, because we're going to have to make hard choices. I know, and it's difficult. You're not trying to pick favorite children here. I recognize and I believe you that they're all needed, but this is your opportunity to give us a little help when we are likely to have to make some hard choices.
And I appreciate the question, and I've given it a lot of thoughtful consideration since that discussion. I've talked to some of my staff. I think the digital discovery positions are a system-wide criminal justice need that are necessary for my office and all the other offices just to function. So as much as I need help with criminal prosecution and abuse and neglect and our juvenile division, I think that one's just obvious if you look at that increase in the responsibility that could bog down the system. Beyond that, if I got 2 lawyers or a paralegal and a legal office assistant, I think they're equally necessary. If the commission gave us a number of FTEs that we could decide down the road, I would be open to that. I truly come to you with what I need, not what I want, and I, in fact, cut down what I think I need to function because I know the position you are in. And Tom Hensley asked me the same question after our discussion, my criminal chief, and I told him, I think we need all of them to function so that we don't implode. If we have to make those tough choices, we will work on that and try to get you a list, or if you give us a number of what we possibly could get when you get closer to the end of your budget, when you have an idea of what you have available or what you're doing as far as an opt-out, I'll be happy to work with you on that.
Commissioner Heiberger.
I think maybe this is the time we should at least touch on the diversion coordinator. This was a position that we approved last year under a grant, or this past year under a grant position. It's a diversion coordinator, and for every successful diversion that we have, we are paid back by the state, and over half of that position is being paid back at this point by state money. And also it was a grant, and I've been told that there's a pretty good possibility it will be funded again next year as a grant. And so that it kind of takes that off of our table as far as, I mean, we're going to fund it, but.
I think it's budget neutral, is my
It's going to
understanding.
be budget neutral.
And in fact, it came up with our discussion with the secretary this morning, and I expressed my concern with the frustration I have in the money we receive compared to Pennington County, and how there should be more consistency statewide on how that is done, because we have the impression that there are counties that are cashing in on people that have not successfully diverted, when I think we do everything by the book here, and articulated that to that group that we spoke with this morning. So I think there will be some more equality. It was even suggested that those amounts increase. I also serve on the Governor's Council's Juvenile Services, this part of a funding mechanism for those things. So I'm hopefully optimistic that there will be more money coming that way. We do diversions at every level, juvenile level. We've done, since I started in '99, we had a diversion program for first offenders for underage consumption, where they come in and complete the programming. We dismiss their ticket, and they don't lose their driver's license and don't pay a fine. It's cheaper for them to go through that programming than pay the ticket. We've done a meth alternative sentencing program for first offenders. If they go through extensive treatment, that we will actually dismiss and seal that offense. Very few do it, because it's easier just to plead guilty and go through presumptive probation and be on probation than go through an intensive program. Unfortunately, they don't take advantage of those because of the nature of that addiction. So we have numerous diversions across the board, but this is a real valuable piece, especially for our juvenile division.
Commissioner Haberger.
This is the Georgetown project that Judge Clark came and talked to us about last fall. And there was a large group that went out and did that week of Georgetown work, and this was their capstone project. So if you're wondering, there are some MOUs or something related to that Carol pulled for me, so if you're interested.
If nothing further, I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us to item 9, and we are a good hour ahead of schedule, which I'm sure doesn't break anybody's heart. So this is an opportunity for us to identify any other departments or outside agencies that you'd like to present. We have been trying to get departments and outside agencies in we've been trying to spread those out. So a lot of those folks have been in with, since the beginning of the year. If you look at our schedule for Thursday morning, we have equalization, facilities, public defender's office, human services, JDC, and treasurer's office coming in. Those were all triggered by requests for new positions. So I'm looking for any guidance any of you might have about other departments or outside agencies you think you would like to hear from, so we could try to get them scheduled if necessary.
Madam Chair, I guess I'd ask Carol what the status of MedStar is on this.
Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, as you look ahead, you have June 6th at 8 a.m. set, and Commissioner Bender took you through those that are out there. As of tentatively right now, because we recognize that last agenda is going to be a bit fluid at this point, depending upon what all happens on Thursday. But June 19th, I have down the ambulance funding. At this point, we've not heard anything from MedStar. No request has come in yet.
To be fair, there was some indication that he was going to, that there was going to be some reach out yesterday, but we haven't heard anything, so. Anything else? Anybody else?
Chairman, if I could just ask if, because one that you sometimes have heard from as a larger budget is the Highway Department. I would just throw that out as an option if you guys want to have any discussion with them about the 5-year plan. I know they've got larger purchases that are out there. You don't always bring them in, but I would ask that question just because of the size of their budget.
I feel fine with it. He was just in here and talked to us, and we can read the material.
I would tend to agree. He just gave us a pretty good presentation. And anyone else? Well, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can call in the morning.
Morning.
But other than that, I think I'll turn it over to Carol for just a recap, which maybe you just gave.
Sure. Yes, tomorrow, on Tuesday morning, you'll hear from the. Thursday morning, thank you. You'll hear from the 6 different agencies. This morning, you had a presentation by Enterprise about fleet management, and that was just informational for you. On Thursday, Craig will come back and talk to you about fleet management, ask for if there's an interest or not an interest in moving forward with that. And then we're gonna let you start discussion and deliberations is really at the point where we're at. To do that, at the end of that, we hope to have some conversations about matrix adjustment. We'll do if there's any information that has changed the means update at that particular point, Kim is able to make those numbers work as she's sitting there. And of course, we have the opportunity for public input. You then have the next week off, and the week afterwards, right now, we're talking about ambulance funding, elected officials, matrix adjustments, review of means of finances as of 6/6/19, opt-out discussion, and you certainly can start that on Thursday also. Provisional budget, just a reminder that final review is on July 23rd with the adoption on July 30th. The opt-out needs to be done by July 15th. That would move you into a July 9th date for your commission meeting as to when you would have to have that noticed. And of course, in the past, you've often done opt-outs that have been greater and you've made them work over multiple years. That's what you did with the last one that's out there. So obviously, I would anticipate as a commission, you'd want to have some of that discussion also.
Anything? Any questions?
I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to figure out how we're going to house staff and where we're going to put them. And I think that discussion has to be part of the operational cost, if you will. We can't just hire staff and stick them in closets or somewhere else. It doesn't seem reasonable. Excuse me. But anyway, I guess I would ask that maybe you and Mark with building services, I know you're somewhat neutral compared to everybody else's interest, to be able to look for alternatives that you might present to us in the next couple of weeks. To come up with where we would put people, because we have to have a place and we have to have something that's reasonable from an operational standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
It might be helpful to reach out to the state's attorney's office, as they indicated they might have some ideas as well. So it's a good idea. Anything else? Okay, it's 3:30. It's opportunity for public comment. Anybody here would like to jump to the podium for public comment? Something that's not on the agenda? Can't imagine anybody wants to talk about anything besides budget, so. All right, well then we are adjourned and we will see everybody on Thursday morning, bright and early at 8 a.m. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate you guys being part of the process.
Kim, I have just a second. I have a question about a couple of things in here.
Our facility study said we'd have enough room.
We would, but we have to make that conversion entirely. And frankly,
Thanks for the treat,
we haven't done anything.
I didn't feel like I could eat it when I was sitting here listening to everybody.
I didn't bother Dean, he did.
I know, I saw he ate his and I thought, oh, I'll wait until I'm done.
Well, this city, so really no reason we can't talk up to them about something if we had to. When I looked at some of these numbers. No,
Temporary places to put people.
Yeah.
are these actuals?
Across the street, that's completely empty.